Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today to talk about social work and technology. I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to just settle in and log in. I know there's still people joining us. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please post any of your comments in the chat box, but there's also a Q&A box as well. If you have questions, try to keep them over to the Q&A so that way we can shuffle them through a bit easier. There are hundreds of people joining us today, so please note that you may ask a question and we may not be able to get to it, but we're going to try our best to get through as many questions and comments as possible. All attendee phone lines are muted and you won't have capability to unmute yourself, so don't worry if you have background noise going on. We can't hear it unless you raise your hand and we decide to bring you on, and then we will unmute you, but we'll let you know beforehand. CEU certificates will be sent by the end of the week. They'll be sent via the email that you registered with. So keep an eye out for that. And seems like everybody is just about joined us. I'm sure they'll trickle in as well, but I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel on social work and technology. I understand we are going to have potentially over 1,000 people here today. So very excited that you're all there, even if we can't see you all. I'm Kathy Potter, Dean of the Rutgers School of Social Work, and we're delighted that you're joining us today. We have an exciting lineup of panelists with us who will share their expertise on the role of technology in social work and how we work with technologies and agencies and with clients. We'll also spend some time on ethics in social work as it relates to technology. I'd love to extend my gratitude especially to NASW New Jersey, to Q&A Tech, and to the New Jersey MSW program directors for organizing this event. It's great to have all of our schools and universities working together on this. In the last few weeks, they've been working tirelessly to move this event to a fully online format while juggling many, many other priorities, as you can imagine. So thanks to our planning team for all the hard work. Today's discussion is more crucial than it's ever been, as we all know. We're all experiencing an unprecedented set of challenges as we respond to the spread of COVID-19. I am hopeful that we're going to actually learn many things during this time that will help us craft the new future that we're about to walk into. We're going to recognize how much we need enhanced technology-aided intervention models and skills for social work. We will also work through how we do this with an eye toward our social work values and ethics. I look forward to the conversations we're going to have as a social work community and to the changes that we're going to create because of those conversations. Thank you for joining us today. Please welcome Jennifer Thompson of NASW New Jersey, who will begin our discussion. Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you, Dean Potter. And welcome to all of you from joining us all over the country. I know that we've had registrations from not only New Jersey, but as far away as Alaska, and it's really fun to see everyone come together and join us in this virtual world. It is a little bit different than we had initially planned for it to be, but I think this is probably the most important conversation that we could be having these days, how we're using technology to connect us to continue to do our work, and really the role of social workers in the technology space, both in practice and future and innovation. There are a couple of things that we are going to speak about today, and we're going to talk a little bit about private practice. We're going to talk about how we're doing teletherapy and connecting with our clients in real time, and how we've been thrust into this new world and are embracing those challenges. We're also going to speak a little bit about the technology infrastructure that you should be thinking about, particularly for those in private practice, but even applicable to small nonprofit organizations and larger institutions, things to consider that perhaps we wouldn't have thought about a couple of weeks ago, but certainly how do we create safe, secure environments for our practice and our work. And then really talking about innovation and forward thinking, the future of technology, whether it be telehealth today, but AI and virtual reality, and how all of those things will come together and lead the profession of social work. I am particularly really excited about this conversation. It's been one that we've been having here in New Jersey, but in the NASW New Jersey chapter throughout the last 2 years. And it certainly feels like the perfect time for us to bring this to a national dialogue. And I'm excited for all of our panelists to share their expertise with us today. So with that, we're first going to turn it over to Pat Spencer. She's an LCSW and guru in telehealth. She's going to share a little bit with us about the state of private practice, considerations for clients, insurance, a little bit more about ethics and telehealth as well. And I am so grateful that you're going to share with us again your knowledge and expertise. So welcome, Pat.
Thank you so much. I got to say, I don't think I've ever been called a guru before on anything. And like a lot of practitioners out there, my skills in telehealth have really grown and been challenged over the past, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks. But something I'd just like to point out, which is that technology and working in technology as social workers is not new. The way we're doing it might be new, using telehealth. However, but technology itself is not new. Just think even something as simple as a phone or a cell phone or email or texting. All of those are various technologies that we have that can be used wisely, also, quite honestly, can be used poorly. And so part of our discussion here today is to figure out how can we use technology in the best ways possible, and also in the most ethical way possible. And when we're talking about ethics, something to often remember is that our ethics are our guidelines. They are what we strive to achieve. And that recently, again, since COVID-19, we've had to look at our ethics just a little bit differently, always holding true to them, always following them, but looking at how do we adjust and adapt them for the settings that we're in now. So in 2017, I think it was, when we came out with the new Code of Ethics, maybe 2016, I forget the exact year, but it was in the new revision of the Code of Ethics that we really started talking about technology. And the big thing to remember is that the ethics are basically the same. We still have, we still need to provide confidentiality for our clients. We still need to work within our own competence. We still need to make sure that our clients are allowed privacy, which is different than confidentiality. And so just one of the things I like to point out to people regarding technology is one of the additions to the Code of Ethics was that we are not allowed to Google search our clients. So just something to keep in mind. But now specifically, I do want to transition to talking more about telehealth. And like many, many, many practitioners out there, 2 to 3 weeks ago, we were thrown into figuring out how to do it. Thankfully, I had a small background in working in some type of technology, providing some type of remote services to clients, because for a period of several years, I was a clinical supervisor of a nationwide peer support line for veterans, in which we provided services through chat, through telephone, through text messaging. But this transition to telehealth has been completely new. So when we're looking at telehealth, there's 3 main considerations that I like to take into consideration. One consideration is the client, the second consideration is the therapist, and the third consideration is the location. Now, there are an awful lot of overlaps in each of those. So I can't sit there and say that when we're talking strictly about the considerations for the clients, that that's not going to bleed into considerations for the therapist as well. So starting with the client, some of our considerations will be, do they want to do telehealth? Over the past week or 2 weeks, I've been very fortunate in that a vast majority of my clients have agreed to meet via telehealth. I think I've only had 2 or 3 people that decided that they did not want to meet via telehealth. So again, one is the client. Is it something that they're comfortable with? Another thing to look at when working with the client is, do they have access to telehealth services? This could be a potential social justice issue. Is, do people have access to computers or to cell phones or to smartphones? Do they have access to high-speed internet? Many people might not have high-speed internet at home, and prior to COVID-19 might have been going to the local libraries for internet access. Well, now that access is gone. And I do believe a lot of internet providers, at least in New Jersey, are providing, I think, free Wi-Fi access for people. But then again, we still need to look at what's the privacy, what's the confidentiality, how do we maintain all of that with the client. So again, we want to look at, does the client want to? Is the client able to? The other consideration with the clients of are they able to is, are they in a safe place? Are they actually able to receive these services in a safe manner? So some considerations I would have with somebody is, if I'm working with somebody in a domestic violence situation and they're living with the person who is abusing them, therapy at home might not be the right option. And if we are doing therapy at home, we're probably going to stick more towards just safety and coping skills, and probably not going into some very deep stuff unless this person feels safe, unless we know that that abuser is not home. You know, would it be possible to schedule at a time when the abuser is at work or is out of the house? That would be some ways you could potentially work through it. Another consideration with the client is, what are the presenting issues that they're coming to you with? Not every issue can or should be discussed at home if that's where the person is. So again, if somebody is coming from a trauma background, if someone has a history of being abused at home, or if someone has had a significant trauma at home, maybe a loved one died at home and that's what we're working through, how safe is it to work with that person through that trauma in this particular time? And I'm not necessarily talking just physical safety, but also emotional safety. One of the nice things about being able to work in an office is that the client can leave their problems or leave their concerns in my office. I'll often tell people, you know, hey, we talked about some really heavy things today. You know, what do we do? What do we need to do to kind of help get you back in a safe place? And maybe we can take that, what we discussed, those issues, those problems, maybe we can take what we discussed today and just kind of put it in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I have a key to that cabinet, I'll lock it, and that's where it's going to stay until you come back next week. And then next week we can kind of crack open that drawer and maybe take some more of that problem out. So again, those are some of the considerations with the clients. You're also going to look at the age of the client. You know, so for example, working with children via telehealth is really quite different than working with children in person. When I'm working in person with a child, a lot of times I'm on the floor, I'm playing with them, I'm drawing. I have a bop bag in my office that is blank. They can do dry erase markers and write all over it and beat the way out of that bop bag. And we have a lot of fun with that. And they're able to work through, you know, some anger, some aggression, some anxieties. Well, that's lost when I'm working on a computer. I still can get on the floor. I can put my computer on the floor, and, you know, when I'm working with a child doing telehealth, I'm going to have them showing me some of their favorite toys at home. Maybe I can meet their pets. Maybe I can see kind of their space. Maybe we can work and try to figure out how can I engage their space to make it safe for them. Again, so those are just some of the considerations with the clients. Some of the considerations with the therapist. Like I mentioned with our code of ethics, it does state that we need to be competent. Well, how competent do we all feel doing telehealth? I have a feeling, a sneaky feeling, that most of us feel a lot more competent today than we did 14 days ago. I worked with several of my colleagues in the building where I work to help them learn how to do telehealth. Not every therapist is comfortable with a computer. You know, regardless of age, I don't care if they're 22 or 82, not everybody is comfortable sitting with a computer and working through the technology. Also with the therapist is the competence of what is the modality that they're using. I am an EMDR certified therapist, but I'm not yet comfortable doing EMDR online. I do know that there are therapists who do EMDR online, and I certainly am trying to read and watch some YouTube videos and trying to get my skill set up, but I'm not there yet. So therefore, I'm not doing that yet. That's where my competence has to come in. This is where, as a therapist, we have to look at ourselves and say, what is it that I can do? What is it that I'm comfortable with? Also, right now, this is not specific with technology, but it's more specific with the times that we're living in, is that oftentimes the therapist, we're dealing with some of the exact same stressors that the clients are coming to us with. You know, how many of my clients are talking to me about what it's like dealing with a pandemic? Well, you know, I'm not living in a bubble. I'm also coping with that. So we also need to look at kind of what is our, what space do we have in our glass right now? And then how do we reach out to others? So also with the therapist, we're going to want to look at how can we build that social support within our own groups, our consultation groups, our peer consultation groups. I was facilitating a peer consultation group in my office with 5 or 6 or 7 peers. Now we're going to be transitioning to online. So we really still are trying to provide those services and those supports. And then the third aspect, so we covered client, we talked a little bit about therapist, but now it's location. And again, they all do overlap. So with location, again, with our codes of ethics, we want to look at confidentiality, we want to look at privacy, we want to look at boundaries, we want to look at how do I not have a dual relationship with these clients. And at times it's kind of hard. The confidentiality, it's not just confidentiality on my end, but it's also confidentiality on their end. So for myself, I still actually go to my office probably half the time, and I'm seeing my clients, but via telehealth, but in my office. And I'm doing that for a few reasons. One is just for my own mental health, just for change of scenery. But 2 is also confidentiality. Like many of you, I live at home with family, and I want to make sure that my clients know that they have some level of confidentiality with me. When I am working from home, this is actually the space I work in. You can see the door is shut behind me. What you probably can't see is that there's a noise machine on the other side of the door. Right now my wife is also working from home. So we're both balancing each other's clients and everything with their confidentiality. On the client side, I want to find out, where are they? Because one of the things we have to look at is where they are geographically. Are they in the state? Are they in the state that you're licensed in? I am licensed in the state of New Jersey. Thankfully, our surrounding neighboring states have opened up allowing other practitioners to practice in their state via telehealth during this crisis. At least I know Connecticut has, and I think Pennsylvania has. Last I checked, New York had not, but I'm not 100% sure that they still haven't. So one thing I need to know is, where are my clients? I work with several college students. I'm located in Highland Park, New Jersey. I'm literally right across the river from Rutgers University. And I work with several graduate and undergraduate students who, since this pandemic, have now gone home. So I'm looking at, can I still provide services? So I have 2 or 3 that are in Connecticut. So the answer is yes, I can. I have 1 in New York, and the answer is no, I can't. So with that one in New York, I then had to help link her back up to another therapist in her area. So that's part of location. The other part of location is, where is the client, not just geographically, but what town are they in? If I had to get emergency services for them, how would I do that? If I have somebody in my office and they end up in a type of mental health or psychiatric crisis, I know what to do. They're sitting there in front of me. I can get help pretty immediately. It is very different when someone's not in front of you and you're having to access some type of emergency mental health services, which hopefully doesn't have to happen. But still, part of my conversation with clients was, making sure I have their home address, making sure I know where they are. And then for me to educate myself on what are the emergency services in their area. When I worked on the nationwide peer support line, this was a very real problem, because many of the service members that we worked with called in suicidal. And we had to find emergency services for veterans in the middle of Wyoming. And I'm like, I don't know the services in Wyoming, but we had to figure it out. So now we have to look at, now we have a little bit more time, how can we make sure we know what those emergency services are? Also with the location is, does the client have their own confidentiality at home? Are they able to shut their door? Do they feel like the walls have ears, or do they feel safe and secure? So part of my discussion with the clients before we switched over to telehealth was, where would you do the services? Where would you do the therapy? Where would we have our sessions? For some, they feel perfectly safe and fine and they love it and they're okay with it being at home. I have several that go out to their car to talk to me, where they hop online and we do the telehealth session via usually their cell phone, sometimes their laptop, but in the car. So they have that privacy. And what else with location? I think that's the gist of the location services and what we're going to look at. The other conversations I have with people is we have to have informed consent, going back to our codes of ethics. So yeah, this all kind of blends in and bleeds in together. Part of the informed consent is knowing the risks and the benefits. One of the risks of doing telehealth, and I'm going to guess that some of you run into this, is that sometimes we lose connection. And not necessarily connection between two people, but connection because of the internet. Maybe there's buffering. Maybe the internet goes down. Maybe electricity goes off. I had it once where I was teaching, and I was teaching online, and it was a synchronous online class, and I'm fidgeting because I like to fidget, and I accidentally kicked the surge protector and turned my whole system off. So what do we do if that happens? How do we make sure that our clients know how we're going to reconnect with them? So do we have another contact information, and how can they contact us as well? So again, with the ethics, we have informed consent. We need to make sure that they know the risks. They need to know the benefits. We need to look at our competence. We need to look at the jurisdiction to make sure we're practicing legally. We need to not Google our clients. And then we also, and again, this is a conversation I have with every client, regardless of if I'm doing telehealth or not, which is how to reach out to me, how to contact me. We live in an age of 24/7 contact. Anybody can get me at any time just by texting me or emailing me. I mean, I almost always have my cell phone with me. So part of our conversation is, what are the limits? What are the boundaries? So some of the conversations I have with my clients is, just because you text me does not mean I'm going to get back to you immediately. And we go over the various reasons why and why not. And it's a great clinical discussion at times. Let me see, I think that is, I'm sorry, I want to talk a little bit about insurance. The health insurance, this question has come up an awful lot over the past few weeks, which is, does health insurance pay for telehealth? And the answer that every therapist I know hates is, it depends, and you have to call the insurance company to find out what they will and won't cover. During COVID-19, from what I've seen, a vast majority of the health insurance companies are paying for or allowing telehealth services. But the telehealth services has to be synchronous video communication. So in other words, it has to be face-to-face. It cannot just be telephone. And that right now, the HIPAA rules for telehealth have been kind of waived a little bit. I still highly recommend that all practitioners, if they're going to do telehealth, that they do it via some type of HIPAA secure platform. So some of the HIPAA secure platforms out there, and I'm not recommending any one or the other. These are just the ones that I know of. Some of the HIPAA secure platforms are DoxyMe, VC, so the letter V and then SEE, Theranest, Zoom, and I believe that there are others. I think actually Ring Central can be HIPAA compliant. But when you're doing a HIPAA compliant software, you have to make sure you're signing a BAA, and typically it costs a little bit extra to get that HIPAA compliance. So in normal times, not pandemic times, if you're going to do telehealth, it has to be via a HIPAA secure platform. And again, that's based on the insurance rules require that. Again, we have to have the confidentiality and everything. But also a lot of our malpractice insurance requires it. And, well, you just have the actual HIPAA laws that require it. So again, during the pandemic, those have been lifted slightly. But I don't see any reason to start bad habits unless we absolutely necessary, unless it's absolutely necessary. All right, so I think that is all I have. I definitely will be around to answer any questions that come up. So Jen, I think I give it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you bring up a lot of really great points, and just because we can doesn't mean we should is something I keep reiterating in the world of technology, particularly around the HIPAA compliant software. And just because we can allow it doesn't mean we should, or that it's the best choice. And there are certainly a lot of tools out there that are making themselves free for practitioners, and we can certainly provide a list of those. I know there's quite the questions in the chat box, so we're trying to respond to those in terms of other software tools, but we'll provide you some more resources as the conversation continues. There were some things that we did want to talk about just in terms of tech infrastructure and assessing your environment. And I think that's a really important piece of the conversation, and we can open it up for questions in a little bit. But certainly as we move to telehealth and delivering our services via phone or webinar, et cetera, whether you're in your home or whether you're in a shared office, there are some things to consider. Secured networks. Do you have antivirus, firewalls? Who has access to your technology? I always say that I'm the best example of an environment that's not appropriate right now for any type of telehealth, as I have people in and out of my space, as you all saw, all day long, and there's just no preventing it. But certainly for the parents who are at home, who have children in your homeschooling, making sure that your children don't have access to your professional devices, making sure that you're locking your devices up, and that your home networks are secure. And we do have a team from Q&A Tech on the line who can answer some of those questions in a little bit as well. I see a lot of them coming through the chat boxes about Zoom compliance, WhatsApp, encryption, and all of those questions. And so in just a couple of minutes, we'll open the line up for that. But I wanted to turn it over to Juan, Dr. Juan Rios, to talk a little bit about the future of technology and social work, as that's also an important part of the conversation. And then we want to get to some of the questions that we see coming through. So Juan, I'm going to open your line up.
All right. Can you hear me, Jen?
We can hear you, Juan.
Oh, okay, great. Awesome. So first of all, it's really exciting to be here with all of you, everyone who's sort of tuning in on the webinar from all different places. It's so exciting to see social workers really come together and talk about this very, very important topic. One that I think is often minimized in our profession for many reasons. However, the perspective I want to take a little bit is as a social work futurist. So just kind of step back a little bit. In full transparency, I'm a professor at Seton Hall University, faculty member there. And also I am an LCSW and I have a private practice in Jersey City. So all my folks in New Jersey, those are Jersey City, what's up, hello. So I'm going to take it from those perspectives. So really, I'm going to break down my brief discussion because I really want to engage in more dialogue and back and forth about the world of possibilities. So the context in which I am going to be discussing social work and technology is more from a futurist perspective. And that simply means someone who really emphasizes foresight thinking by watching the signs and signals in order to be prepared for all of the possibilities, which is very different from what it sounds as a futurist. You don't predict the future. You're not someone there who's trying to say, all right, well, in 3 years, we're all gonna be flying on cars. It's gonna look like, Back to the Future. We save that for the movies. We save that for Black Mirror. What futures thinking is a pedagogical frame that I think and believe that all social workers need to be able to engage, and social work education has to do a better job as far as integrating this technology into our curriculum. So my work really began through contemplative pedagogical work. From there, I engaged a community of mind and life scientists, those who were researching mindfulness and science. And through that awareness, I found a community, a tribe of folks who were not saying mindfulness and technology or mindfulness and science are in two different silos, that these worlds can exist, that humanity and tech has to coexist. So there isn't a greater profession than social work to really be leading that cause, that we are the quintessential transdisciplinary field. And it really moved me to thinking, well, what's happening out there? And I've connected with folks in Stanford University. I see there's a fellow out in California and Berkeley. Shout out to you guys. I spent a summer at Stanford in a virtual reality human research lab. And I found out the phenomenal work that they're doing, which is that they're researching how we can increase empathy and decrease implicit bias through virtual reality platforms. They're researching how we could change behavior through human interactions through the form of body transference in virtual spaces, and exploring that from more of a psychological research perspective. Now, and I took it a step further and I said, what are we doing in social work? And I know there's some phenomenal folks out there like Courtney Cogburn at Columbia University. If you guys don't know who she is, I highly recommend you watch her videos online. One particular is 1,000 Cut Journey. The full version is not available online, but you can contact Stanford University and discuss how you can coordinate on getting engaged with that. Other folks.
Juan, I will interject that she is also going to be at our conference this year as a keynote. So good time to come.
Phenomenal. I mean, if you are able to make it and listen to Courtney Cogburn, huge shout out to her. She's doing amazing work and being able to explore how we can reduce implicit biases and increase empathy through the form of engaging in virtual reality spaces. NYU, folks out in Laura Neeson, out in Portland, who has been really my inspiration, my kind of virtual mentor in futurist thinking, really has inspired me to explore this in all different areas. And one of the main areas is where I began to integrate virtual reality in teaching social justice in my courses, and exploring, can this be useful in social work education? And what I found is that students were able to place themselves in these virtual spaces in where they may never have been in a position of privilege, may never have been able to put themselves in. For example, one of the programs is homelessness. And my students were able to say, I never realized the complex narrative of what it means to be homeless, that everyone who's homeless does not mean that it's because of mental health and substance abuse. There's a larger, complicated narrative. So it opened up the windows for discussion. And what I found is months later after the assignment, that students were still reporting through their reflective exercises how now they're able to look at those who identify who are in the homeless population in the eye when they go to the train station or when they're walking to work. As before, they would kind of lower their gaze to try to avoid interactions. But that's just one example of being able to integrate that technology. But one thing in particular is that there's not a framework to be able to use it in social work education. It's could use it from a utilitarian standpoint, but there's not a frame to ethically integrate. And I'm going to give an example here. Many of my students, we don't know what background they come from. Absolutely not. So when you ask someone to go through a virtual reality experience, when, to use Courtney Cogburn's example of 1,000 Cut Journey, where you're taking the role of an African-American male walking through his community, being stopped by the police in these virtual spaces, and you have to, raising your hands up, it could be very triggering for some, okay? It could be an experience where it's re-triggering traumatic memories. And do we have the framework in order to ethically prepare our students to engage in those spaces, but also clinically de-roll from these enactments? And that's a lot of the research that I'm working on now. And it's really built upon my colleague's work, Anthony Nicotera, on the Circle of Insight, which develops a framework on being able to create reflective, contemplative spaces. And that is being able to notice what's around them, moving towards the empathy and feeling piece, moving to the reflection and creating opportunity for not just discussion, but being able to write on their own, and then take action. And that's the social justice piece in which social work cannot minimize our voice when it comes to integrating it with emerging technologies. And I'm going to share a quick example. So in 2016, this company called Youth Laboratories, I believe, created a beauty contest. And that beauty contest was going to be judged by an AI, okay? So 6,000 people submitted their selfies to this platform And the AI, for the first time ever, the AI was going to be able to judge what is beauty. So I'm going to let you guys sit with that, begin to think about what could go wrong, right? So needless to say, about only out of all the 6,000, there was only one at the end, out of 75 finalists, only one had a bit of a darker complexion. Everyone else was of lighter complexion, okay? Out of the finalists, as far what we view beauty, what the AI viewed as what is beauty through machine learning, right? It's really aggregating all of this data that's out there. And, that's data that you and I put in when we search what's beautiful, when we search, what's in the movies, when we search what's in just general media and Instagram. So as we continue to integrate artificial intelligence and machine learning into not just our economic world, but our social spaces, it also will be what informs its decision-making as to what is beautiful, as to who is at risk, who's deserving and not deserving. So being able to complicate those discussions and engage in those discussions is what we have to be able to be a part of, and not just in our own silos, but being able to reach out to Panasonic, right? Because they're if anyone's kept up with the news, they've developed a toilet that's able to take your all of your biometrics. It's able to determine, what if you have high not blood pressure, but your cholesterol, if you've been using drugs, okay, if you're at risk for any diseases. So you could think about this. Would I want to use this? And who collects that data? And insurance companies are saying, if you buy this technology, we will reduce your premiums, because now we're able to prevent some of the healthcare issues. And think about, again, going back to Pat Spencer's point about who has access to this. It's another social justice issue. So if my premiums are lower because I have this, robotic toilet that determines and can predict what are some of the future health implications that are out there, me as a person of privilege has access to that, not only lowering my premiums, but also being able to determine whether I'm at risk for certain future health problems. And those who don't have access will just continue to create that disparity of health and poverty that is a social justice issue. So, we're really piggybacking on Pat's point. So now I'm going to touch a little bit about field and social work education. And we have Marian Dixie's on the line, who does a great job in the field at Rutgers University. But through COVID-19, what happened literally overnight? Our students lost their field placements. There were severed clinical relationships that occurred like that, okay? And now we were expected to integrate this telehealth, and go back to Pat's point, not everyone is capable or should be using telehealth. And what is that? What happens with that clinical negotiation, that contract? That I am being forced now to the Sophie's choice, either A, don't continue with therapy, or B, continue with therapy through telehealth. Are we processing that with our clients in the clinical realm? Because it's another sense of powerlessness, in which not only was there displacement between our students, there's these forced terminations that occurred, but then there's this other piece on saying, well, you do have telehealth, and then all of these other clinical implications happen, okay? Which is now moving into your space of your home. Where do I find, how do I create a holding environment in a telehealth world? Those are all very kind of clinical questions that in social work education, because of COVID-19, our world cannot be the same. And through futures thinking, we have to be able to apply this as a signal, okay? That what are we doing in social work education to be able to prepare ourselves for the next COVID-19? Let's not be ignorant or naive here, rather, for lack of better words, that this may not happen again. We have to be better prepared. And as social workers, not only being the folks out in the field, but being the folks who are creating new pedagogical models that they are able to prepare our students, prepare our future educators to be able to know we need to have this discussion ahead of time, that now should our code of ethics reflect what happens during health crises when we're forced to move away from face-to-face interactions. Should that be integrated as a form of preparation through our first session? As much as we go through TerraSoft and Duty to Warn and Protect, should this be a conversation to prepare our clients ethically? And social work education, we as futures thinkers, noticing these signs, have to be able to prepare what our universities doing to prepare themselves for this. And Davenport University right now has developed a program in which it's not only remote learning, right? We're not only moving towards online learning, but they're also using avatars in the classroom to engage in online learning. So you're able to walk up to specific desks, engage with your professor as an avatar, move to another desk, engage with another classmate as an avatar regarding social work interactions and engagements. And considering all of those other very important nuances that occur, that who I'm choosing to be, and what avatar am I choosing to identify myself with, okay? And how does that play a role into the engagement, both in social work education, when we think about how we continue to other, but also thinking about how does that apply to our clinical practices, which, you know, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that for a second. And make sure you check me on time, Jennifer, because I gotta, there's so much to discuss. I really want to stay focused and be able to provide room for question and answers. Now, let's move into good. Okay, great. Let's move into our clinical practice. What does it look like to integrate virtual reality in our clinical practices? Are we doing that? And if so, why? And if so, why not? And is there enough material to be able to talk about? What are all the clinical implications that go into integrating, not just understanding the ethics behind it, but what frameworks, clinical frameworks, are we having those discussions? And are we processing it from a clinical standpoint? And not just through desensitization, where right now it's virtual reality is used a lot. You know, Pat nodding her head, she knows that the VA has used this to treat trauma patients. But what about not just through desensitization, but what about using it to practice skills on engaging with their partner? What about using it as a way to integrate with our wearable technology to bring our clients down from anxious and dysregulation? Okay. And then being able to use that same tool for them to take home and practice at home. What does that look like? What are all the sort of discussions that happen to its accessibility with our clients? And can it be a tool? That's a question. The question is, can we do better at integrating these tools to enhance our clinical expertise? That can it be another part of our tool belt? And we already have biofeedback, right, as a part of our clinical tools and technology that we use. But what happens, thinking about futures thinking, that when biofeedback is able to be uploaded into your wearable iWatch, okay, and then you, as a therapist, being able to monitor that of how your clients' levels are being dysregulated through different times of the day, and possibly saying, I'm noticing that on Wednesday during the evening, you had a spike in your cortisol levels. Tell me more about that. And is that an issue of privacy? Okay, so, but looking at all those complications, and again, I'm not here to discuss what's right or wrong. I want to be able for us to engage in discussion and conversations, and to move away from staying stuck, but to think about what are the new languages that we could learn through futures thinking and emerging technology, and also what are the new ways of thinking that we can adopt in social work practice, but in social work education, into how we advocate for social justice. And we know that artificial intelligence is now being integrated in the criminal justice system. And how is that also playing a role? What studies have shown is that it still further perpetuates race bias even through artificial intelligence. And that's common knowledge. Why? Because it gathers the data. It says, well, what are the risk factors here? What are the data points that it's collecting? Where you're from, who's more at risk to offend. And we know that African-American men are more at risk, are 16 times more likely to be a victim of a violent crime. But yet it's gathering who's actually incarcerated, right? Who are those folks who are mainly in jail? What is that data is being pulled in to look at predictors as to who will reoffend. And we as social workers, we in the profession, we have to be involved in this dialogue and this conversation through whether it's environmental justice, social justice, race-based bias, our artificial intelligence or virtual reality representation of us. What is that? Is it accurate? Okay. Even when we're washing our hands, and I don't know if those of you who may be out there notice, I myself try to wash my hands in a sink that uses what's that? Infrared, right? To be able to know to signal when you should wash your hands, right? The water comes down when you dip your hand in the bottom of the faucet. It doesn't do that for me that well. You ever wonder why? Well, it doesn't detect dark skin as well as it detects light skin. So who is this technology being created for? Okay, and we have to get ahead of this conversation, not wait until the next COVID-19. And I'm going to leave with this last example, with two sort of examples. And for those of you who remember Ready Player One, okay, this movie that came out, folks that were in these virtual games, and they created different avatars, and they're running around, trying to win this $1 million or something, okay? Everyone enjoyed the movie, but no one ever asked, how did they get there? And if you read the book, you know that the reason that they were in those environments is because, one, it was an economic collapse, and two, there was a social collapse due to fear of I think it was health or another a crisis that occurred, and that sounds really familiar, right? Folks had to be isolated, figure out ways to maintain their sanity, using a form of escapism through virtual reality to engage in worlds where we now may be trapped because of quarantine. And can we use the technology that's out there now in a way to both preserve our mental health and also enhance our clinical skills? And my last example I'm going to give here, these are all signals that we use in foresight thinking. I don't know who's those folks out there can remember. It was this movie with Sylvester Stallone, and it was a futuristic cop. Don't remember. If somebody knows it, please type it up on the screen. Help me out here. So he's a futuristic cop out there. And there was a scene in which he asked, Sandra Bullock said, "Oh, do you want to have sex?" He's like, "Yeah, let's go. Let's have sex." So she hands him a virtual reality glasses, and she puts her VR glasses on, and they begin to have sex. He's like, he takes it off and says, "What the hell's going on? What is this?" So she responds to him that in the future, the fall of the Western civilization came because of issues of human contact and touch, okay? And begin to think about that. Where are we in the COVID world, the COVID age? What will happen post-COVID? Will we could move back to giving each other hugs? Will we be more likely to move into online platforms and enhance the emerging technology to submerge us in those spaces? These are all questions that I'm not here to answer. These are all questions that I want to challenge all the social workers out there, and there's spaces of social workers who are already engaged in this conversation, like Laura Neeson, like Warren Miller, Ashley Stewart, all these folks are out there, are already engaged in conversations, but it's not enough. It's not enough. COVID, what that has brought will forever change so many components. And next semester for our students, it's going to be a different pedagogical approach that we have to look at client engagements, social justice, education, and clinical practice. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly bring up a ton of really great points, both in terms of practice today and what this means for the future. I wanted to just take a second. I know that there are a lot of questions coming through, and I don't know if Annie, you have anybody who is on the line with questions or has their hand raised, and I just wanted to check in with the community. We have over 700 people joining us, so we see your questions, they're coming through, and we're going to jump in and get to a few of them.
Yeah, so if you have your hand raised, I just lowered all hands a minute ago. So if you do have a question, please raise it. Okay, so we have one from Lisa Lawson. So I'm going to give her a chance to bring herself on and unmute herself. But one, everybody has some great comments about your background and your decor. So.
Oh, you see my Sade? That's I love Sade. Sorry.
But Lisa, I think you should be able to talk.
Hi, yes, so great job, everyone. Really getting a lot from the perspective of both a clinician and administrator. It gives me a lot to think about in regards to how we can support our colleagues in the field. My question is, for those populations, and I'm sure this is occurring in many of your facilities around the state, how are you able to address the issue of offering telemedicine, telehealth services, even if it's Zoom or FaceTime for the homeless population? That's one of the struggles we've really had here in Central New Jersey is addressing that as a disparity with wanting to offer those services to folks, but they do not have the technology, whether it be a phone or access to internet even, and not just for the homeless, but also for those who are just so economically disadvantaged that they don't have access to Wi-Fi or dial-up services.
Go ahead. You want to take? Nope. Go ahead, Pat.
I wish I had an easy answer, because that's a great question of how do we provide services using telehealth to those that just don't have access to telehealth, whether they happen to be the homeless population. Maybe it's a population of those with serious mental illness that just don't have the financial resources. Maybe it is an immigrant population, maybe all sorts of different levels. And unfortunately, I don't have an easy answer. Some of it is, if we can kind of look at technology kind of in the here and now, but also looking at what can we do like once this pandemic is over. Because although we don't know when it's going to be over, at some point this pandemic is going to be over and we're going to be going back to some type of new normal. It's not going to be the old normal, that I know. But how can we work with folks at that point? Right now in COVID-19, all I can really tell you is we can do the best that we can. So for some of those, it might be, I don't know, I'm kind of making this up right now, but does Elijah's Promise have access to Wi-Fi that maybe some of the homeless population in New Brunswick can get to Elijah's Promise, and maybe if they have some type of smartphone or computer, which I know they may or may not, would they be able to have services at that point? If we look at what like Doctors Without Borders has done, sometimes it's having a location where the person can go to that maybe there's a computer or a phone that then links up to a therapist at another location. Again, I know those are not perfect answers. I know that those are not answers that necessarily are going to help in the here and now and today. Sometimes we also have to look at, are there ways that we can still provide in-person services? I saw a few questions come through on the chat about, well, what do we do with folks that don't want to do telehealth? And so if we can look at those that don't want to do telehealth and those that just can't do telehealth, what are other ways that we can work through that? Is it face-to-face? Is it, again, now in the pandemic, is it face-to-face but 6 feet of separation? Again, not ideal, but better than nothing. Again, so just for the here and now, the today, the COVID-19 world that we're living in, it's what's our best possibility? What's our best option? And while we're looking at that, this is a great time. I also saw several chats come in about what are we doing with our policy makers, our state legislature, our mayors, our freeholders, our whomevers. This is a great time for us to kind of connect with them. And, as social workers, this right here, this is our wheelhouse. This is a social work wheelhouse, is how do we advocate for change? And how do we, help make it so that internet is available to everybody, not just the select few that can afford it. Again, Lisa, I think you have some great questions, and I really wish I had a better answer than we just kind of have to make do. But for right now, unless there's some local agencies, like I know libraries are closed, I know schools are closed, but I don't know if there are other like Wi-Fi hotspots that maybe somebody could connect to. But again, they would actually need the technology to be able to do that. And this is where it gets a little bit more confusing. And the possibility of looking at like an Elijah's Promise type of, which is a social service type of soup kitchen agency here in Middlesex County, that can they provide a location for somebody to be able to come in and then get telehealth from a therapist from somewhere else.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think the other thing, I think this brings up such a good argument for why social workers are needed in the conversation around technology and how it emerges and grows and evolves over the years. It's not enough to think about these things in a time of crisis. We really need to be thinking about how is internet available to everyone? How do we make sure that everyone has access to telehealth services, and what does that look like? And I think more now than ever, it's a good case for our funders, and particularly large funders, to invest in these types of conversations and work with social workers to come up with the infrastructure and the platform, so that when the next pandemic comes, and it will, that we are prepared and that we aren't struggling to find the resources for people who are the most vulnerable. So good point, Lisa.
So Jennifer, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So, hey, Lisa, by the way, love Lisa. Piggybacking off of what Pat's mentioning is that this is also, we have to consider what if this is maybe another social justice issue that we as participants in social work have to consider. Well, can we now advocate for this? And as we're even trying to advocate for universal healthcare, healthcare that's accessible, is this component now has to be included into that universal healthcare bill, or any bills that we are going to be coming up either through the state or the federal government, and which is why it's so important for us to not only just engage in this dialogue and in this discussion, but also participate, which is going to be kind of a shameless plug, but not really, on the for the NASW, and also for the NASW conferences that are coming up, in which these conversations are being held. I'm sorry, but Jen, I have to give you so much credit for what you've been doing. One, through COVID-19, but how you've been thinking as a futurist. You've been seeing what was to come a long time ago. We've been having a discussion about tech, damn near a year ago. And you've been fighting to get funding to look at technology in different ways, and having folks come together and explore ways we could think about tech so that it is accessible to others. So to answer Lisa's question, really, there isn't a solution right now. We have to create that solution. We have to be able to engage in our associations and think critically and say, why can't I be the person to work with these tech companies to develop that? I cannot wait for someone else to do that. I have to engage in my future. That the future of what we create. We don't let someone else create that future for us. We look at our iPhones and we wonder why we have 3 cameras. Who said that? Why have 3 cameras instead of making it cheaper and more accessible? Or why have 3 cameras, or be able to create a software to help women who are getting abducted? We have to be able to engage in the conversation of what what kind of new technology comes out there to be able to address social issues and social problems. So engaging in this conversation is the first step, but more so being engaged in association, so with this larger voice and numbers, to make sure that when the budgets go out or these bills happen, NASW is right behind there to make sure, hey, don't forget about this population and how are they going to have access to it.
Yeah, thank you. Annie, who else has got their hand raised?
No, no one with hands raised right now, but we do have a question that is, what should you do if you get sick all of a sudden and you have you're a single person private practice? You know, how do you handle that? How do you move forward with the client? I see some head shaking, so.
Pat, do you want to take that on?
I would love to. Actually, I don't want to take that on, but yes, no, it's a great question. It's a very valid question. And as someone who is in private practice, I can tell you that this is something that I have thought of. Again, this is not something that's just during COVID-19. This is actually part of what should be a private practitioner's plan. When we open a private practice, we need to have a plan of what happens if we get sick. You know, it's not just COVID-19 that can get somebody suddenly sick. I used to work in an emergency room. I know that emergencies happen just like that. So what to do in private practice? Well, the first thing is to make sure this conversation with the clients kind of from the beginning, of letting them know that, you know, hey, here is my emergency plan. Hopefully there is either somebody that is working with you or a colleague or a peer that you trust that could that, again, the clients would have to sign off on this, but just about every single informed consent out there is going to have something along the lines of, and other parties might be informed as needed for medical reasons or something along those lines. You know, so is there a trusted colleague that could potentially call all of your clients or text them or email them or whatever it happens to be? You know, is there a family member, a spouse, a husband, a wife, a whatever, that could possibly do it? You know, is there a way that clients call to confirm their appointments beforehand? And so if there's ever an emergency, your loved one knows how to change your voicemail that says, hey, Pat is unfortunately not able to see clients right now and she'll get back to you as soon as possible. You know, again, this really hopefully is part of our planning, you know, all the time of what are we going to do if we get sick? What are we going to do? Even if we don't get sick. I believe in work hard, play hard. I love to go on vacation. So one of the conversations I have with my clients is, what do you do when I'm gone? You know, what do you do when I'm gone for a week or 2 weeks? How do you get hold of me? Do you email me? Is there somebody else? Is there another clinician? Is there another, you know, one of my colleagues? So this is really part of what, you know, having a private practice is this is one of the risks we have, is how do we talk about what happens if we get sick or God forbid we die? You know, those that work in an agency, this is one of the areas where you're really lucky because you have colleagues, you have coworkers, you have a boss that can handle some of this. When I'm sitting in my little office by myself, you know, I have no boss, I have no colleagues, I have nobody, it's just me. So part of my planning with my clients is, you know, if I ever get sick and I'm incapacitated sick and I'm not able to let you know, somebody will be getting in touch with you. So that's kind of how I handle it. I couldn't hear you, Jen. You're on mute.
Yep. There we go. Technology fail. One of the other things I just wanted to jump in, I think that's great and really important for private practitioners to think through, but also all other social workers in every other setting. I know rather timely conversation because this morning I emailed our IT team to say, you know, we're thinking through contingency plans too. If someone on our team gets sick or if I get sick, here's the person who will contact you. Hand over all of the information to them, whatever they need. So I think having, you know, these backup plans is really important for private practitioners, but anyone in an agency setting, if your leadership isn't having that conversation with you, then you need to be having that conversation with your leadership as well to say, if I become sick, who picks up the things? Where do I find them? And even more challenging now because we are in home offices and we are working remotely, and they might not have access to all of our files and our resources like you normally would in an office. But there's a lot of planning to be done right now. And from NASW perspective, we're certainly having those conversations. Everyone has a backup right now. I want to open up to a bunch of the tech questions that we've had, just the basic nuts and bolts, because we haven't gotten to some of those. And I know that there have been a number of them. Annie, I don't know if there's any specifically, and I can, if you've seen come through, or I can jump into a few of them.
Yeah, I've seen a lot about, how to maintain compliance, how to be HIPAA compliant while using platforms online. Questions also about Zoom, particularly because Zoom was recently hacked. What's the difference between regular Zoom with your friends or, Zoom using telehealth? So questions related to that.
I think I'd like to turn this over to our tech expert. Q&A, are you on the line? And do you want to talk to them or the group a little bit about compliant software, what they should be thinking through infrastructure-wise, and maybe a little bit about the idea of Zoom hacking, if that's a thing? Probably is a thing. You are on mute.
I think you're unmuted, Marcus. You should be able to start talking.
Give it 1 second.
Is that better? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, there you go.
Perfect. I was double muted. I apologize all. So Marcus Greggs, Q&A Tech. We've been working, one of the technology partners and IT providers for NASW New Jersey. I've seen the multiple questions about what is sort of the standard. And the answer is, guys, there's multiple platforms out there that make sense for your sector. At this point, one of the things that I'm going to provide to, as long as I have a list of everyone that's been on this webinar, I will provide something called the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which pretty much is exactly what it sounds like. It's a list that's been separated into 4 quadrants, and you always want to be on the right side in terms of what's considered the standard for any type of technology, rather than say kind of shill individual platforms, because there are some that I do sell and work with that I know for a fact work, but might not be sufficient for what you're looking for. What I'm going to do is just share sort of the top 5 that Gartner recommends. They're completely independent. They're nonprofit. So I think that's probably the best way to kind of disseminate information and let you guys know that, here's who can be trusted. I will say, to Jen's point, absolutely, there's no getting around the fact that Zoom has in fact been hacked since COVID-19 has started. That doesn't necessarily mean that Zoom isn't a product that you should look at, but I can't not state the obvious. You guys all have Google and can see what's out there. With that being the case, there are multiple options out there that, yes, someone mentioned that in most cases you'd have to sign a BAA with whatever technology you tend to use to kind of be on board and have it be HIPAA compliant. It's an added cost, but one of the things that we kind of went through last year at New Jersey's conference is that added cost is minimal compared to what you might end up paying for not taking the steps to at least start to be HIPAA compliant, whether it be with telehealth, record keeping, what have you. So I'm not going to sit there and go through each platform. There are many, but what I will say is that I'm absolutely, myself and my company are open to hearing your questions, whether individually or in a group setting, and starting the conversation further. But there are, for example, we're using RingCentral. Clearly it works, and it is for sure HIPAA compliant with the click of a button and an added cost. So
yeah, thank you. I think resources is a really, sending around that evaluation tool is really helpful. One of the things that I think you bring up a good point, and we haven't talked about it yet, and I want to make sure that people are aware of it, is the risk associated with using non-HIPAA compliant software. Again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And one of the conversations that I've had probably 50 times a day is that you also need to check with your insurance providers as well as your professional liability insurance. Again, there are often provisions written into insurance that require the use of HIPAA compliant software. It is a best practice. And, we don't want to avoid, HIPAA compliant software because it's too difficult to figure out, or there's just Facebook Messenger, which I hear people use. We don't want to be going down that road. It certainly, there are a number of tools and resources out there to make sure that you're doing this and doing this correctly, and that you're protecting yourself, your clients, and your businesses going forward. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that, particularly as you start to think about the evolution of telehealth and digital connecting with your clients, and particularly for those who haven't thought about this to begin with, making sure that you're creating a system that works for today, but also that will carry you forward. And one of the things I encourage people to do is take a step back before you take a step forward in investing in technology, and take an assessment of what does your practice environment look like, not only today, but are you going to go back to a physical shared office? Are you going to go back to seeing people all in person? Or are you going to continue to use telehealth, which is awesome for a lot of people? This has been that push they needed to sort of embrace the technology in the new way. Taking that sort of self-assessment before you invest in a technology is really important, because there are great tools out there that solve for the immediate need for like HIPAA compliant telehealth, but also address long-term needs as well, such as secure texting with your clients, integrated voice system, phone, and a number of solutions like RingCentral, particularly because we use it and we've really been happy with it. But there are a lot of tools out there that will do a number of things for you in your practice, and I think that's really important to look into.
So I think
go
from a tech standpoint, one of the things that we're looking to integrate with NASW New Jersey particularly, but I'd like to see happen nationally eventually for NASW as an organization, is the ability to have what's called sort of tech in the box. That's something that Jennifer has kind of been spearheading along with Juan and a couple of other people in the field, to kind of get an understanding of what is it that you guys need from a tech standpoint that's going to take the guesswork out of it a little bit, kind of give you back the time of not having to worry about, quote unquote, these things like whether something is HIPAA compliant, what kind of firewall should I be using for my home office or my office in general, and sort of streamlining that sort of process. That's something that we're working closely with NASW New Jersey. I'm hoping that by the time we are looking to do the conference at the end of April, we'll have something on a virtual marketplace that hopefully is a few clicks for you guys and solves all the questions that you guys are asking for. At least a beta test site for that. So that's on its way, and something that Jennifer has been harassing me on you guys' behalf. But I think it's useful and something that will do a lot of good, especially with the current environment that we're in. So,
thank you. I'm not sure if this is Kathy Dixon, but Professor Dixon had a question. Firewalls, static IP addresses, are those things that they should be considering now? Any thoughts on any of that? Or if, I don't know, Annie, if we can unmute her as well and bring her on the line to clarify that question.
The answer is yes, but if she can come on the line and clarify a little bit further, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you'd like to come on the line, you can just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Here. All right, I'm allowing you to talk. You just have to unmute.
And if you could just introduce yourself and tell us where you're calling from, that'd be great.
Hi, this is Catherine Dixon. I'm calling from New Jersey, the Bergen County epicenter for us, and have been a technology, I would call myself early adopter. In fact, I was the first presentation done at NASW New Jersey's conference years ago on the subject of technology. This is over a decade ago. And I've been practicing using a lot of these tools. The problem is, as an early adopter, I have like now a half a dozen different piecemeal things that I've been trying to piece together. I need somehow to integrate this stuff without spending another small fortune, considering how much I've already invested in all of these separate pieces. Meaning I have software management tools, I have different types of platforms to use for a million different things. Very comfortable with them all. The problem is now they're becoming cumbersome because they won't communicate with each other. Where are our tech friends who care about how much of a nightmare this has become for us? This has become case management gone viral in another virtual manner because we already had to track and document all this stuff. Now we have a million different places we have to track. I'm sorry, I can't do that because I'm not AI. I'm HI, and my human intelligence is limited to being able to manage one device or platform at a time. And I have found myself challenged these last 3 weeks trying to manage close to a dozen.
Right. The truth is, I'm not sure we're any closer to creating our own all-in-one or codes that can link all of these things together. But I think you bring up, the notion that we should be in these conversations and we should be working with developers to help us think through some of these things. I wish I had something that I could say, or we could say to you, yes, this is exactly what you need today, and it's going to solve all your problems. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. I don't think we're there.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of tech people. I know my private contact tech guy. I called him when this started. I said, I bet you're getting busy again. He goes, yeah, because it's not plug and play this week. And yeah. And so I said to him, isn't it funny how you're in a tech field thinking that's not very person. You sit with machines. You deal with the stuff. You read these kinds of combinations of letters and numbers that make me go blind, and you understand them. But you can make my stuff work. And so he said, yeah. He said, but we're not coming together exactly what you just said in helping them write the code based on what we really need out of all these things. They're guessing at it, and they're maybe taking one focus group or pilot focus group's opinion on what they need. And that's the limited consideration for that proprietary software program. Meanwhile, my social work tells me we're supposed to use the tools, continue to educate ourselves, bring what we can to the client where the client is. So knowing all those things and everything we've talked about today, you add on the social justice piece, this has created a huge divide for us as a profession. Because not everybody in the profession, nor every one of our clients is going to be able or willing to do this with technology if we don't make it much more simple and accessible. And to me, that's where the macro stuff comes in. I feel like we should be Zoom bombing every press conference with demanding that these cameramen, that can do this for them and get that live streaming hooked up in a heartbeat because the show must go on, that they start donating some of their volunteer services to the mental health providers who are really the second wave of emergency responders. We're not first responders, we're second responders. And that is coming to a town near us in the next month or two. We know it.
It's so true. So true. Well, certainly something for us to continue to think about. And I will just put on a little plug of what we have on our radar. Once we get past the COVID crisis and the annual conference, we are planning a tech symposium, as this has been certainly a conversation front and center, as Juan said, for at least the last year and a half, where we do plan to bring together experts in technology for what we call a hackathon, and to really hack through some of these problems and develop some systems and coding to solve for some of the problems that not only private practice is having, but also how do we use technology in addressing social justice issues. And there's some great work being done by one of our keynote speakers, Dr. Desmond Patton, who's using AI and VR as well to address gang violence. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to lead this conversation. So I'll make sure that you certainly have the information and maybe you'll join us in the lead of technology. Let's see. I want to open it up for other questions. Annie, do we have any others that have come through?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about telehealth. I think that's what's most salient on many people's minds, you know, particularly because of what's going on. But I do want to remind everyone, though, we are going to answer a bunch today. On our NASW New Jersey's website, we have a really great COVID-19 FAQ and resources page, as well as links to previous webinars where we've talked specifically about telehealth. So you can find a lot of that information there. One question that just came up is, if you're working in an agency setting and that agency is not providing access to a HIPAA compliant platform, can you purchase one to use on your own? Does it have to be affiliated with the agency? How can you navigate that? I think a lot of people in agencies are having those concerns now.
Yes, that's a sticky question. And I think I see Pat, any thoughts on this? If not, I have a couple of suggestions for people.
My thoughts are, thank God I'm in private practice. In all honesty, I don't know the answer. I just don't know the answer. I would think that a lot of times in agency work, like for example, when I'm providing clinical supervision to somebody in an agency, technically the clients are that agency's clients. So in clinical supervision, I need the agency's permission. So it would make sense to me that you would need the agency's permission for that HIPAA compliant platform. I'd also be just really curious as to why an agency is not paying for a HIPAA compliant platform when it'd be so much more expensive to deal with a HIPAA violation. But
Absolutely.
that's just my opinion. Yeah, so Jen, I'll let you pick up on that.
Any other panelists? I don't know if Juan, you have thoughts. You also in private practice. Care to weigh in here?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question. You know, I really don't have a clear answer for it. I really echo, you know, Pat's feedback in regards to, you know, what do you do when that happens? It's tough because as an agency provider, you should be considering, okay, what are those steps I'm looking at in order to protect my organization, but also protect my clients. But I would implore to have that conversation. I mean, as a supervisor as well, I love open conversations. I think both either interns or clinicians were all a part of an agency collaboratively, and to have those discussions, to ask that question directly, and what are the alternatives. But what's on a different note, what's great, and really going back to, you know, Kathy Dixon's question about user-friendly platforms and integration, is that where we can see as a result of this sign of what happens with COVID-19, there's going to be a lot more folks trying to make money in technology because of this, and that, you know, HIPAA compliant platforms will be simpler platforms. I mean, Kathy was doing this 10 years ago, and the costs were just, you know, astronomical, especially when it comes to telehealth. And people were so much against that back then, and you know, insurance companies were like, hell no. And how quickly it's shifted, changed due to, you know, different crises that have occurred. So I wouldn't be surprised, and Marcus could correct me wrong, that we're going to see the next few years a lot of private industry folks try to get into mental health and capitalize more than it is now, and figuring out platforms and cheaper products and platforms that small businesses, mental health practices, private practices can have access through affordability. So, you know, stay on top of it for those folks who are wondering, well, where is it? Where is it? Stay on top of it. Continue to engage in conversations with the other clinicians and mental health providers about what's new, And in the next few years, we're going to see these platforms become cheaper and cheaper. I mean, even like we all use Zoom, but we know that Zoom isn't, HIPAA compliant automatically because you have the lowest version. And what Doxy.me is out there, and it's a free service, but does meet those needs. And 3 years ago, they did not exist. 2 years ago, that type of free platform didn't exist. So we have to stay current and also be a part of that dialogue.
Yeah. And the thing that I would also say is that this is an opportunity for our agencies who aren't using HIPAA compliant software. And maybe that's because they don't have a social worker in leadership and aren't, governed by the same code of ethics and values that we have, and don't necessarily look at the business of the agency's work through the same lens that we do, is to take our code of ethics and to take your social work advocacy hat to leadership to say, there are things that we can do that are free and inexpensive and that do protect us in a way. And it's a time to be an advocate for the clients, but also yourself. And I think there are a lot of questions around whether you can or you should be following your agency's direction to use non-compliant software, but how that violates the code of ethics, and does that put your license at risk? And I think those are all really great questions. And when I don't know necessarily the answer to, I always err on the side of caution and following our code of ethics and making sure that I'm making the best decision. You can call our NASW hotline and they'll help you with some of those questions. So for those of you who have some of those more specific, nuanced questions that I saw come through the chat, I would just refer you back to the NASW New Jersey website. Members get free ethical and legal consultations, so you can call, speak with our support team, and they'll answer some of those questions for you or help you answer some of those. Just looking back over some of the questions. Annie, before I dive into some of the other ones, are there anybody with their hands raised?
No, not at this time.
So Jen, can I jump in real quick to piggyback off something I said earlier?
Of course.
We also have to, as social workers, expand our careers and thinking about where our voices and what kind of jobs we can also be thinking about in tech that's needed. So, for example, Laura Neeson, who's been doing this work for a long time, she's been consulting with Microsoft, Nike, Panasonic, because there are tech companies that are capitalizing on the need to integrate more social components to address social issues, but there aren't social workers engaged in that dialogue, but now they're starting to see that value. So for folks who are out there who have a background in social work, business, have a pretty healthy understanding of tech, and even if you don't, understanding the human experience and being able to challenge companies who are pushing forward these technologies, they need your voice. I mean, that's how Calm was created, and now it's a big hit. Things like Headspace. Someone earlier mentioned that they work for a nursing home, and that's a vulnerable population right now, assisted living, who's historically is very isolated, and now with COVID-19, even more isolated. And for those who have sort of this intersectionality of issues, including ability and not able to maybe use a smartphone because they can't see the screen, or how do they have access just to maintaining that contact? So we won't be able to further create worse mental health situations for them. And we need social workers involved in those tech companies. There's a tech company now who has a robot AI that's working in assisted living facilities to provide some sort of comfort care, because there's not enough of staff members out there to provide one-on-one contact. So these folks who are really isolated, they're trying to figure out ways, and how can tech be a bridge, not the answer. Let's correct that. Not the answer, but a bridge. And the question is, are there social workers involved? And there's lots and lots of opportunities out there. I'm working with a couple of companies now where I'm providing consultation. you are able to provide your skills that you learn, the competencies we learn in social work education are valuable. And we in social work education have to do a better job as also being mindful and saying, this, you're not just limited to X. You could be a consultant, you could work at these tech firms, you could work in answering the problem that we're coming up with today. I wanted to make that explicit. Sorry, Jen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point, and one that we've been thinking about a lot as well. Certainly not just as it relates to private practice, but even, school social work and how that's been transformed, and how are school social workers using technology to connect with their students in a different way. And there are so many opportunities. And I think particularly because we have a number of students on the call today, I think earlier in the chats we saw conversations about, where do I go? How do I find work? Am I going to be able to practice because now the world has seemingly shut down? I think in a true social work forum, I think this is an opportunity to reframe a little bit as well and talk about possibilities and what has this taught us, and what are you as the next generation of social workers more prepared and more equipped to tackle on behalf of the profession. And I think your experience both going through school in a time of crisis and now finishing your degrees in distance learning and what all that means, you'll have a lot to contribute to the world of academia, and certainly a lot to contribute to the world of practice when you go out, because you'll have lived through this. And I think that's really important. And I want for all of you to take away that this is an opportunity for you to get creative. And we at NASW had sort of a moment of panic 3 weeks ago when this all started to unfold of, we've got a conference coming up. What do we do? This is a big in-person event. 1,500 people come together and we all love it. It's a space that we all value and cherish, both for learning and just respite and camaraderie. But the times required that we sort of break it and fiddle with it to bring it online and to create something new. And I think that for you as students, this is a great opportunity to sort of noodle with what does social work mean and bring technology into the conversation in a way that perhaps it wouldn't have been 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago even. And tomorrow will probably be different as well. I'm sure there'll be something new tomorrow.
Jen, I'd like to follow up on this 1 second on behalf of the NASW, of the MSW directors. In terms of education, there were some questions around graduating students feeling that they weren't trained in order to do this kind of work. Got to say, you guys, none of us were really trained to do this work to this point, and it really puts a plug in for the lifelong learning process of being a social worker. That we always have to be adaptive to new challenges as they come along. It's a point that we need the continuing education that the schools offer and NASW offer. Bring those topics forward. So be watching for many more sessions, I'm sure, on this. So if you're feeling unsure, we all are feeling unsure. So more education and training is coming your way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to be cognizant of time. We knew that initially this was scheduled to be a 2-hour event in person, but we are offering 1.5 CEUs for all of those. I had questions about that. We saw that come through the chat as well. So I do want to be mindful and just start to wrap us up and the conversation up. Just a couple of housekeeping questions. CEUs, I know that many of you have questions about that. That will come directly from NASW New Jersey. Give us, till next week to get those out. It is a manual and laborious process, one that as social workers just falls under the other duties as assigned, and it takes us a little bit to get through all those. So for those of you who are looking for CE credits, those will be emailed directly to you at the email address of which you registered for. We also will be posting this online at the NASW website. So for those of you who want to share this, you can certainly do so. And it will be offered for additional CEUs through our online learning platform, which is called InReach. We will also make this available, a transcript available. I know that we had a couple of individuals who were looking for a transcript, and we can make that happen. And we'll post that online as well. There were a couple of questions in terms of connecting you with all of the speakers, and of course we will do so. Both Pat Spencer, Dr. Juan Rios, Marcus, all of the school social workers, and Rutgers University will certainly make that contact information available to everyone. And as always, you know how to contact NASW. both Annie and myself are here to answer questions for you. I just personally wanted to say thank you again to all of the speakers and the participants. This has been a conversation that started pre-COVID, and I guess if you had to look for a good time for a global pandemic that required you to embrace technology, we had the perfect time to be engaged in this conversation. Though I know it's really stressful for everyone, the students, the educators, the practitioners, for those of you who are also at home working with children and trying to figure out how you balance homeschool and all of that. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for making time. And any last words from the speakers before we close out for the day? But you have to unmute yourself.
No, I got nothing. Just thank you for your time and all your questions today. It's been really fun interacting with everybody, and that we're all kind of working through this. Just like Dr. Finley said, I'm a lot more knowledgeable today than I was 2 weeks ago. And one last word is be open to make mistakes. Be open to sit there and try to figure it out, and show your clients that this is a great way to learn, and that nobody is perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So
well, thank you all so much.
I also want to piggyback off of Pat Spencer's point, and I want to thank you, Jen, for putting this together. You guys have been amazing and phenomenal on transitioning so quickly with everything that's happening very, very fast. I also want to give a huge shout out to all the social workers out there who are really doing some amazing work, thinking about our clients out there who are in pain and suffering, and making sure that we keep our own mental health as a priority as well. And we talk about self-care, and what does that look like over and over. But I don't want to minimize that. That's such a powerful component to our learning process and to our learning process about ourselves. If anyone wants to reach out to me, I would love to connect with you on the side about so much more, whether research or resources that are out there that I can point you to. I know there's a lot of questions about integrating. What can you use? What kind of tools do you use with either adolescents or children? And please remember that this is a part of our clinical tool. So if you were in your office and you were trying to engage with a child or an adolescent, what would you bring in? And thinking about that as an extension of your practice, rather than it being instead of thinking about it in place of, this is with my current practice. So use your clinical tool belt. And there's lots of great games out there, clinical games you could use with adults to keep them engaged in sessions. There's videos you could bring in. I mean, there's tons of stuff you could do the same way you would do if you were in session. So lastly, I just want to be able to also emphasize that social work has led the case of every sort of social problem in our society, and we will continue to lead. But I encourage all of us to sit with the discomfort of what's happening. Also the discomfort of just not knowing about these emerging texts, and saying that as echoing Pat Finley's comment about being a lifelong learner. But these are things that it's not this or, it's this and. We could bring these things into our clinical practices and can enhance it, and to continue to be thinkers of what's next. So keep up the great work, everyone, and I'm honored to be here with you guys.
Thank you all so much, and we'll make this available later today online for your viewing, and stay tuned for more information.